So here is our intro to rhetorical appeals. This is the major beefy part of any rhetorical analysis, is going through and discussing how these rhetorical appeals are used. So Aristotle defines rhetoric as, rhetoric may be defined as the faculty of observing in any case the available means of persuasion. It's not a function of any other art. Every other art can instruct or persuade about its own particular subject matter. So for instance, medicine about what is healthy and unhealthy, geometry about the properties of magnitudes, arithmetic about numbers, and the same is true of all the other arts and sciences. But rhetoric we look upon as the power of observing the means of persuasion on almost any subject presented to us. And that is why we say that in its technical character, it is not concerned with any special or definite class of subjects. So what the heck is he getting at there? Well, he's getting at the fact that rhetoric, unlike math or science that has kind of its own stuff in it, that rhetoric has a technical character that has to deal with persuasion. So it has its own thing. So like rhetoric helps mathematicians and scientists, and they help them make their arguments, because although scientists are very good at performing their science and doing the experiments, it's putting together their arguments and putting their arguments together for a certain audience, that they need help with rhetoric. And so this is why you all are taking this English 102 class, because the academy is still based on this idea that, rhetoric and writing are these kind of uber disciplines that have these tools that are helpful for all different disciplines and situations. So this could be situations in life, but this could also be and should be situations in the rest of your academic career. And so for us today in this video, we're really focusing on the rhetorical appeals. Now, your job is to analyze these rhetorical appeals and think about how they're operating within the rhetorical situation. However, you're going to start to think about, especially as we get to the final paper in this class, is how you actually use these rhetorical appeals to your own ends. And then you'll hopefully take out of this class and through the rest of your college career how to use these rhetorical appeals in your own writing and arguments. So ethos is the rhetorical appeal that has to deal with the building of credibility, trust, and quote-unquote character. They are, quote, proofs that rely on a community's assessment of a rhetor's character or reputation. So you'll see over on the right, the infographic that I've given are these really characteristic these really iconic video game characters. Now, one of the things you'll notice is that they really haven't changed a ton over time, right? And so one of the points I'm trying to make by putting this together is that by putting this infographic there is that Nintendo is relying on the fact that we know and trust and see these characters as credible in some way, so that we will then buy games today that still have these characters in it. Now, certainly there are games with new characters, but the fact that Mario, and right, that's what, especially with like the new Nintendo games, Mario has stuck around and built such that Nintendo has built such an empire on Mario. And one of the rhetorical appeals of Mario are his ethos, is that we understand and love the character of Mario, and we trust that these games are enjoyable based on old ones. So here we can see how Nintendo is making an appeal to ethos, right? What you'll find as you're looking at appeals to ethos you'll be looking at two things. There's the thing that is that ethos already in the situation. So like the president, he's the leader of the free world. He has, or the United States, he has ethos as the president, right? But in certain situations, in certain speeches, he still needs to do things to establish ethos. So even if in your paper you're like, so-and-so has ethos because of their background, that's really great to bring that up. But I also want you to look at the rhetorical ways that within the speech, the advertisement, the documentary, that ethos is being established. So how is the rhetor, the author, the company making us trust and believe them based on the claims that they're making? So is it, like, for instance, the president, a couple months ago, President Obama gave a speech where he detailed the executive orders he was taking on gun legislation, right? And it was kind of controversial because, number one, his ratings have dropped. Number two, guns are a very sensitive subject, and they bring out a population. So definitely the people who support the NRA are really opposed to, especially a Democratic president, doing any sort of legislation on guns, and especially an executive action. And so what you would look at in the speech, if you were really looking at it in terms of ethos, so that's the rhetorical situation. And so now you need to understand that he has to do a lot because he's making executive orders. He has to do a lot in terms of ethos to build trust with a wide community. And what, if I were analyzing that speech, I would look at is how he establishes himself as the president that has had to deal with these mass shootings. And specifically, one of the most difficult in American history is Sandy Hook, involving children. And so that is an appeal to ethos right there, because he's using, and you'll look at, in your paper, you're going to look at the specifics. So the wording, or maybe it's the repetition of something, right? So why does a president in a speech need to continue to reiterate that they are the commander-in-chief? A speech on war, right? Why are they doing that? And what are they doing? Because that's part of the job title. That's rhetorical, and your job is to look at the rhetorical situation and decide why that president would need to, within the situation, continue to articulate to the American people that they are the commander-in-chief and that they do have the power to declare war and enact war and legislate war and plan war and things like that. Okay, so ethos, credibility, trust, and character. And when I say character, I don't necessarily mean character in the funny sense, like they're building a character. I think character as, if a community is really looking for a certain type of character, so an American character, right? What does that mean? If a community is looking for a certain type of character, the rhetor standing up to be that person. If you're looking at a documentary that the audience is, say for instance, animal activists, and they're building ethos maybe through that. They're building within the documentary this character of animal activism. So pathos is probably the easiest thing to look at. Pathos are appeals to emotion. Now, sometimes students get really caught up in emotion just being sad, right? It's just sad. So we think of that Sarah McLachlan video. The dogs and their eyes, coupled with the music, that really enacts a sadness in the audience, and it compels them to do things. But pathos could also be, a speech maker coming up and telling a joke right at the beginning, right? Pathos could be an ad that uses normative ideas of what a happy family is to try to sell their product, right? So what does showing a happy family, how does that incite emotion into an audience, and how does it then help them buy a product? And then you also want to be able to understand the emotional range on this issue or the background here. So is it appropriate to the audience, and is it appropriate to the situation? Like if someone's just screaming and yelling, right? So I don't know, there's it was a viral video, probably 5 or 10 years ago, but it's a young man and he's just screaming, "Leave Britney alone!" And it's about Britney Spears and the paparazzi and all that stuff. And he's just screaming, "Leave Britney alone," right? And if we thought about the emotional range there, like what he's trying to do, he's probably, for the rhetorical situation, he's probably way too dramatic. So if you were analyzing that, that's what you'd say. Logos is perhaps the hardest to analyze because logos isn't logic, okay? So get that out of your head. And ethos isn't ethics, okay? Ethos is credibility and trust. Logos is not logic. Logos is two things in rhetoric. It's the structure of an argument, so using structure rhetorically. So for example, starting to think about how the author or the rhetor is taking the audience to see its point. So this could be like, instead of putting together a proof that takes us, well, A equals B, taking us to Z, instead of doing that, maybe they tell a story, right? And they're trying to get the audience on board through these stories. And by using that structure, and your job as an analyst would be to show us how they're using that structure. By using that structure, they're really, they're appealing to logos in that narrative is getting this audience on board. But maybe they're dealing with an audience of scientists, right? So maybe like telling stories, or a biologist or something. So, or, doctors. So for example, like, I'm going to give you 2 examples. Maybe they're thinking about ways that women give birth. Maybe it's a documentary that's trying to persuade women into a more natural birth. And so what they do in that documentary is they tell so many stories about women giving natural birth. And it's through these stories that they're expecting, through the narrative structure, that they're expecting women watching this to really connect with the other women and want to give birth that way. So they're using narrative to get at that audience. Now, that documentary, to a group of women, doctors who deliver babies, so OBGYNs, right? That documentary, the OBGYNs might be like, this is crazy, like women are giving birth at home, but there's no medical statistics, there's no mention of studies. And so that group is going to need a much more rigidly structured argument, so structured on really beefy claims with evidence. So looking at the difference of those, right, we can see how those different structures would be used rhetorically to match both the situation and the audience. So that's one example of what logos is. It's the structure of an argument, right? It's also the evidence used in an argument. So why certain arguments use qualitative data. They use personal examples, narratives, they might use pictures, they might use, like not really a study, like a really published study, but they might talk about how like 3 of my friends went to this place. So it's really kind of anecdotal evidence. Whereas using quantitative data does something, so using numbers and facts, it adds something to, it adds a different feel in terms of logos to a text. And so thinking about how the author is really, and logos is really thinking about these as crafts, right? So remembering that a documentary is a craft, that somebody decided how this worked and they're putting together very purposefully this way. or an ad is a craft. So thinking about all of those things in logos. And so that is the intro to Ethos, Pathos, and Logos. Thank you.